Disturbing True Scary Stories to Broadcast. In the summer of 1997, Kyle Brennan was a college sophomore working the overnight shift at WKDR, a small AM radio station in rural Vermont. The station had been operating since 1952, broadcasting from a transmitter building 15 miles outside of town, surrounded by nothing but dense forest and mountains. Kyle's job was simple. Keep the automated playlist running, read the weather and traffic updates every hour, and make sure nothing went wrong during the dead hours between midnight and 6 a.m. He'd been working there for 2 months without incident. The isolation didn't bother him. He was a communications major who loved radio, and the overnight shift paid better than any job his classmates had. Plus, the station manager let him play whatever music he wanted as long as he stuck to the approved format during peak listening hours. But on July 23, 1997, at exactly 2:34 a.m., Kyle received a call that would change everything he thought he understood about reality. The phone system at WKDR was old, installed sometime in the 1960s, with a blinking red light that indicated an incoming call on the request line. Kyle was reading a book between updates when the light began flashing. He glanced at the clock, 2:34 a.m. Nobody ever called the request line during the overnight shift. He picked up the receiver. WKTR, you're on the air. What can I play for you tonight? Static filled the line. Then, beneath the crackling noise, Kyle heard breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths that sounded wrong somehow. Too wet, too labored. Hello, Kyle said, his finger hovering over the disconnect button. If you can't hear me, you'll need to call back. I can hear you perfectly, Kyle. The voice was male, deep, with an accent Kyle couldn't place. It sounded old, not elderly, but ancient, like something that had learned to speak human language but never quite mastered it. Kyle's blood went cold. He hadn't given his name. Who is this? I'm a listener. I've been listening for a very long time. 45 years, to be precise. I have a request. The request line isn't really. Play The Ballad of Thomas Greer. The voice interrupted. You'll find it in the archives. Third shelf, red box, tape labeled TG 1952. Play it at exactly 3 a.m. If you don't, people will die. The line went dead. Kyle sat frozen, staring at the phone. His heart hammered against his ribs. This had to be a prank. Some local kid who'd figure out his name from the station roster, trying to scare him. But something about that voice, about the specific details, made his skin crawl. He told himself to forget it, to go back to his book and his automated playlist. But curiosity gnawed at him. The archives were in the back room, a climate-controlled storage area filled with decades of recordings, old commercials, and local productions. Kyle had never explored it thoroughly. There was no need to. Everything they broadcast came from digital files now. At 2:47 a.m., Kyle found himself standing in the archive room, running his flashlight along the shelves. The third shelf was packed with old reel-to-reel tapes and cassettes, most unlabeled or marked with cryptic abbreviations. His light found a red box, smaller than the others, pushed to the very back. He pulled it out. The label read, TG 1952, do not broadcast. Kyle's hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside was a single reel-to-reel tape, the magnetic ribbon brown with age. A note card lay beneath it, yellowed and brittle. He read it by flashlight. The Ballad of Thomas Greer was recorded live on October 31st, 1952, during WKDR's Halloween special. Thomas Greer was a local musician who claimed he could write a song that would open doors between worlds. He performed this ballad once, live on air, then died of a heart attack immediately after. The tape is not to be broadcast under any circumstances. 3 people who heard the original broadcast died within 24 hours. This tape is kept for archival purposes only. Station manager Robert Walsh, 1952. Kyle should have put the tape back. Every rational instinct told him to walk away, to ignore the phone call, to finish his shift and never think about this again. But he kept hearing that voice in his head. If you don't, people will die. What if it was true? What if not playing it would cause harm? The thought was irrational, impossible, but it burrowed into his mind like a parasite. At 2:58 a.m., Kyle loaded the tape into one of the old reel-to-reel players they kept for digitizing archive content. His hand shook as he queued it up to the broadcast system. He told himself he'd just listen first, decide whether to actually broadcast it. At exactly 3 a.m., he pressed play. The tape hissed with static, then music began. It was acoustic guitar, played in a minor key with a finger-picking style that sounded Appalachian but wrong, like the notes were slightly off from any scale Kyle recognized. Then a voice began to sing. Thomas Greer's voice was beautiful and terrible. It carried harmonics that shouldn't exist in human vocal cords, resonances that made Kyle's teeth ache and his vision blur. The lyrics were in English, but the words themselves seemed to shift and change each time Kyle thought he understood them. Between the spaces through the cracks, where light can't reach and time folds back, I sing the song that opens wide, the doors that keep the worlds divide. Kyle felt something change in the broadcast booth. The air grew thick, heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. The fluorescent lights began to flicker, and shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, deeper, as if there were tunnels leading somewhere else. The song continued, and Kyle realized with growing horror that he couldn't turn it off. His hand moved the stop button, but his fingers wouldn't obey. He was paralyzed, forced to listen as Thomas Greer's voice wove patterns in the air that Kyle could almost see, geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. The listeners who hear my call will see beyond the mortal wall, and those who answer, those who know, will join me where the lost souls go. The phone began ringing. Not the request line, but all the phones, the main line, the emergency line, even the fax machine was shrieking. The lights in the booth started flashing in rhythm with the music, and Kyle's computer monitor displayed text that scrolled faster than he could read. Words and languages he didn't recognize. Then the temperature dropped. Kyle's breath misted in front of his face, and in the reflection of the booth's glass window, he saw someone standing behind him, Thomas Greer, or what was left of him. The figure was translucent, flickering like a damaged film projection. He wore a suit from the 1950s and held an acoustic guitar. His face was young, but his eyes were ancient, filled with knowledge that no living person should possess. When he smiled, Kyle saw that his teeth were too numerous, too sharp, arranged in patterns that defied human anatomy. "Thank you for playing my song," Thomas said, his voice overlapping with the recording. "I've been waiting so long for someone to let me back in." Kyle tried to scream, but no sound came out. Thomas reached toward him with fingers that seemed to have too many joints, and where those fingers passed through the air, reality tore like fabric, revealing glimpses of somewhere else, a place of impossible geometry and crawling darkness. "Don't be afraid," Thomas whispered. "The broadcast is almost over, and when it ends, you'll understand. You'll see what I saw. You'll know what exists in the spaces between the radio waves, the signals that travel through the air, touching millions of ears. We're not alone in those spaces. Kyle, we've never been alone." The song reached its crescendo. The guitar notes spiraled upward into frequencies that made Kyle's ears bleed. And in that final moment, he understood what Thomas Greer had discovered in 1952, that certain sounds, certain patterns, could punch holes in reality. That broadcast signals didn't just travel through empty air, but through dimensions we weren't meant to perceive. The tape ended. The lights stabilized. The phone stopped ringing. The temperature returned to normal. And Thomas Greer's ghost faded away, leaving Kyle alone in the booth, blood trickling from his ears, his mind forever changed by what he'd witnessed. When the morning shift arrived at 6 a.m., they found Kyle sitting at the broadcast desk, staring at nothing. He was alive but unresponsive. The tape player was still running, but the reel was empty. The tape had somehow vanished completely. Kyle spent 3 weeks in psychiatric care. He told the doctors about the phone call, about Thomas Greer, about the things he'd seen in those moments when reality tore open. They diagnosed him with a psychotic episode, possibly triggered by stress and isolation. The station manager found a red box in the archive, empty, with no trace of the tape or the warning note. Kyle never worked in radio again, but he kept a police scanner in his apartment, and every night at 3 a.m., he listened, because sometimes in the static between stations, he could hear Thomas Greer's song, and he wasn't the only one who could hear it. Reports came in from across Vermont. Other people who'd been listening to WKDR that night at 3 a.m., who'd heard the ballad, who'd seen things in the shadows of their homes. 12 people in total called the police that night, all describing the same impossible figure with too many teeth and too many joints in his fingers. 3 of them died within 24 hours. Just like in 1952, the FCC investigated but found no evidence that anything unusual had been broadcast. The digital logs showed normal programming, but the analog logs, the ones from the old system that still tracked the actual broadcast signal, showed something different. At exactly 3 a.m., there was a spike in the transmission, a surge of energy that should have been impossible with their equipment. And buried in that surge, when analyzed by audio specialists, was a pattern, a message encoded in frequencies that human ears couldn't consciously detect, but that the subconscious mind could process. The message repeated endlessly throughout that 3-minute broadcast. I am the door. I am the way. I am the space between your words. Listen, and I will show you what exists beyond. Listen and join me in the signal. We are broadcasting forever. We are never alone. We are the voices and the static, and we are waiting for you to answer. Kyle knows the truth now. He knows that Thomas Greer didn't die in 1952. Not really. He transformed, became something that exists in the electromagnetic spectrum, in the radio waves that surround us constantly. And every broadcast of that ballad doesn't just play a recording. It opens a door. Sometimes, late at night, Kyle's phone rings. When he answers, he hears only static. But beneath the static, there's breathing. And beneath the breathing, there's singing. Thomas Greer's ballad, playing forever in the spaces between stations, waiting for the next person to open the door, waiting to broadcast his song again.